questions to the Prime Minister. Question number 1, Mr. Michael Brown.
Number 1, sir.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I presided at a meeting of the Cabinet and had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today.
Mr. Michael Brown.
Mr. Speaker, while welcoming the release of a number of hostages from Iraq earlier this week, will the Prime Minister make it absolutely clear that her government's and the world's determination to remove Saddam Hussein from Kuwait remains undiminished?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I gladly respond to my honourable friend. Of course we are glad to see some more hostages home, and particularly glad both for them and for their families. Their return brings the total number of British nationals who've come back from Iraq and Kuwait so far to 900. But we are particularly concerned about those who are left, some 1,400, who have been taken totally contrary to international law, and they and their families are suffering. For this we should utterly condemn Saddam Hussein, and we stand unequivocally by the decision of the United Nations so that the whole of the territory is restored, to Kuwait, and Saddam Hussein must withdraw, and the legitimate government must be withdrawn. The legitimate government must be restored, and the hostages released, and compensation paid to the people of Kuwait for the terrible damage done to their territory.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister join me today in offering unreserved praise for the humanitarian efforts of the Right Honourable Gentleman, especially when there are common objectives on both sides of the House, and the Right Honourable Gentleman has undertaken his successful efforts whilst giving absolutely no comfort to Saddam Hussein and whilst giving unending comfort to sick people and their loved ones.
I thought if the Right Honourable Gentleman heard that I had already done that. We welcome the return of the hostages whose release was secured by my right honourable friend, the member for Bexley and Sidcup. We welcome their return. They bring the total of hostages who have returned, people who have returned from Baghdad and Kuwait, to some 900. We regret very much that there are still over 1,400 there, as I am sure does my right honourable friend.
Mr. Anthony Marlowe.
Mr. Speaker, popular...
Order. Mr. Marlowe.
Mr. Speaker, popular attitudes and aspirations change. Wise political leaders, like my right honourable friend, respond to those changes. In the 70s, she encapsulated them. In the 80s, she gave effect to them. What is her assessment of the perception of the aspirations and attitudes of the British people for the 1990s?
Get her down a bit. Order. Order. I think it might take a little time, but Prime Minister...
To continue to rise to the responsibilities of defending freedom staunchly, as we have always done in the past, to carry on with the pound sterling and the powers of this particular Parliament with regard to the economy and monetary policy, to carry on with the policies which have resulted in more jobs than ever before, and the creation of more wealth and a higher standard than ever before, of a kind which also enabled us yesterday to announce a further £5 million to both families, £5 billion to be distributed to the families with young children and with old people.
John P. Smith.
defer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Speaker, what action does the Prime Minister propose to take to halt the destruction of our countryside, especially in areas of outstanding beauty like the Vale of Glamorgan, where developers propose to build no less than 6 golf courses, 4 large hotels, 3 new town settlements, and a racing track? This madness must stop.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman is aware, that is a matter for the local planning authorities, and as he is also aware, one has to try to find a balance between the beauties of the countryside and providing jobs for the people.
Mr. Robert Hicks.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree that it is right to give every encouragement to strengthening the rural economy so that we maintain the social stability and the fabric of the countryside as we all know it? And in that context, would he not agree that farmers, as the managers of the countryside, have a specific responsibility, and they will not be able to undertake those if real reductions in their level of their income results, particularly in the hills and in the beef and sheep sectors?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend that the preservation both of the rural countryside and of the rural economy is vital. But much of the landscape that we seek to conserve was, of course, the landscape created by farmers in the first place. And there's nothing contradictory between wanting to conserve the environment and looking after farmers. I agree with my honourable friend, it is particularly important to look after the fortunes of the hill farmers. We have, in fact, tried to do that. We pay hill livestock compensation allowances of over 125 million a year. And the total support to sheep and beef sectors is running at about 750 to 800 million this year, compared with something like 450 million last year. So we are trying to make up for the very, very difficult time which many farmers have had this year.
Mr. David Hinchcliffe.
I defer the honourable gentleman to the reply which I gave some moments ago.
Hinchcliffe.
Is the Prime Minister aware that the £5 per week increase in income support payments to care home residents announced yesterday will do nothing to stem the tide of care home closures and evictions that are affecting vast numbers of elderly and handicapped people? Is she also aware that the safety net of local council homes is no longer available to many of these people because these homes have also been closed by the local council because of government policy? Isn't it a fact that the government's free market experiment in community care has been an absolute disaster to vast numbers of elderly and disabled people, the most disadvantaged and vulnerable groups in our society?
Mr. Speaker, the announcements yesterday came to £5 billion increase in next year in all. That is a fantastic amount made possible by the successful policies in the economy of this government. With regard to care in residential homes, this government is spending out through the taxpayer £100 for every £1 spent under Labour.
Mrs. Maureen Hicks.
Yes, sir. I refer my honourable friend to reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Maureen Hicks.
Acknowledging that quite rightly, 3 out of 10 absent fathers pay maintenance. Does my right honourable friend not think it is an absolute disgrace that 7 out of 10 absent parents, usually fathers, make no contribution to their children whatsoever, and in so doing put an intolerable financial burden on the state and cause untold misery on the deserted families? And in welcoming the future white paper, which under government we are now bringing in to eliminate that problem, could she please undertake to ensure that those pressure groups who ask for legislation don't actually now cause us to water down our proposals?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend. Sometimes fathers may walk out on their families. They must not be allowed to walk out on their financial responsibilities. They must rise to those responsibilities. Otherwise, the conscientious families have to meet not only the cost of looking after their own families, but the cost of those who have walked out on their responsibilities. We shall not water down that white paper. Those people must rise and make some payment to their children, and a proper payment to the children whom they've left.
Sir David Ellis, Thomas.
Does the Prime Minister have plans today to meet with the farmers from all over the United Kingdom who have come to London to lobby a move which began at Llanrwst in my own constituency? She has already answered a question on agricultural policy, but will she not understand that as long as her Minister of Agriculture and her government's policy is to support a 30% reduction in farm incomes, in farm support, in the GATT talks, that this will undermine any proposals that the government may be putting forward to to maintain agriculture in the hills?
Mr. Speaker, I've already indicated some of the extra help that we've given to hill farmers. We recognise it's vitally important that they should stay farming in the hills. In addition to those which I spoke of, we've also recently announced a higher rate of suckler cow premium for the hill producer. And next year we shall pay a special supplement to hill sheep farmers. That is all extra help to them. With regard to the point which he made on the Uruguay round of a 30% reduction in subsidies, 30% from 1986. So it takes into account a lot that has already been done. I think he would agree that where you get heavy subsidies going on the continent to small, inefficient farms, it undermines the opportunities which our larger family farmers have to both be efficient and for them to get the larger market. It is important that our family farmers have a better chance being very efficient to get a larger share of the market for food.
Mr. Jonathan Said.
My honourable friend to reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Said.
Will my right honourable friend find time today to look at the Audit Commission report on day surgery? She will note, if she reads it, that it demonstrates very clear disparities in efficiency between authorities. And would my right honourable friend therefore agree that organisations spending billions of pounds of public money have a duty to not only determine best practice, but also to implement it?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Audit Commission has done an extremely good job both on the Education Service and on the Health Service. The report which came out today was particularly interesting. It showed that different district health authorities vary very much in the efficiency with which they use their resources, particularly with regard to day surgery, where it pointed out that if all of the health authorities bring their day surgery up to the level of the best 25%, 186,000 more patients could be treated with no extra costs. That would help enormously to bring down the waiting list. It would not require any more money, just the better use of money which they have already had. Indeed, we have already given a great deal more money to the health service. In the last 3 years, it's gone up from 24 billion to 26 billion to 29 billion, far better than any of the party opposite could ever have touched during their time in government.
Is Sylvia Heal?
The Honourable Lady, to the reply I gave some moments ago.
Mrs. Heal?
Given that the Prime Minister has said there are incontestable signs that the economy is working in the way in which we intended it to, does she gain any satisfaction at all from the very comprehensive report published this week by the Association of the British Chambers of Commerce, which shows that industries everywhere, including the West Midlands, are already in severe recession?
Yeah. Speaker, where we have inflation in the economy, that is to say that the extra money supply was going not into extra growth, but into extra prices. It was vital we squeeze that inflation out. What the report from the British Chambers of Commerce shows is that we were entirely justified in reducing the interest rate from 15% to 14% at the precise time in which we did, and I would have thought that honourable members opposite, gentlemen and ladies, would have had the integrity to admit it.
Peter Fry.
Would my right honourable friend return her attention to the plight of British agriculture and not agree that basically it's the fault of the monstrous common agricultural policy devised and administered by the Commission in Brussels? And is it not therefore time to point out to Mr. Delors that his comments earlier this week, the Commission
the unelected commission, would take over all tax, environmental and employment laws is something that her government will totally reject.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend knows that my right honourable friend, the Minister of Agriculture, battles nobly for British farmers, very nobly indeed, because the thing we object to is discrimination on the continent in favour of small farmers, for many of whom that is not their livelihood, while discriminating against our British farmers who have family farms much bigger than those on the continent and have a very high standard of efficiency. We think those with a high standard of efficiency should have a bigger share of the market for food, and therefore they would get bigger and better incomes.
Business